Hi, my name's Terry Rice, and this is The Signal brought to you by Fiverr. Today, we're joined by John Winsor. John is currently the executive in residence at Harvard Business School's Laboratory for Innovation and Science, which studies AI and workforce transformation strategies. He's also the founder and CEO of Open Assembly, a company that helps organizations create the future of work. So let's go ahead and dive in. John, how are you today?
I'm good. How are you, Terry?
I'm doing well, and I'm already familiar with your work, but do you mind introducing yourself here?
Yeah. Hey, I'm John Winsor, and I work in the future of workspace. I have a position at Harvard at the Laboratory for Innovation Science at Harvard, where we study open talent models. What we mean by open talent are alternative models, including freelancing and tech-enabled networks inside organizations and crowdsourcing. And we study AI as well. So I've got that, and I've built a community called Open Assembly, where all the best thinkers in the space get together on a regular basis to have conversations.
All right. So let's get into this conversation. And you mentioned networks already. I was looking at your LinkedIn, and you mentioned the value of a networked culture. So culture is obviously very important to any organization, but can you explain what a networked culture is and how leaders can implement that?
Yeah, I think it's important to rethink culture, right? I mean, I think a lot of the work that I do is around mindset, going from a scarce mindset to an abundant mindset. And when I think about culture, I think some people think about culture in the context of what's, the culture in my office, and how do I have that culture magnify my, proposition. One of the things we discovered in the book, talking to a guy by the name of Paul Livko, who runs Wellmark, he's the CTO and CXO. One of the things he said is he called bullshit on that. He's like, there's no one company that has one culture. If you've got more than one office, you've got more than one culture. And so the reality of reframing what culture is. And so when I think about networked culture, what I mean is the holistic view of the culture, and a company that I think that best embodies that, and the listeners will probably best understand, is probably something like Patagonia. Patagonia is a very small core of people that work there full time, but then there's all these kinds of people that come in and out that work when they're in town or not on a climbing adventure or surfing or whatever. And then they sponsor all these athletes, and then their customers, and they look at culture as a holistic thing. They look at it as their customers, their field representatives, their athletes, their employees. And I think that's the way we have to look at culture and how we are perceived in culture, because there's no difference between the internal culture and the external culture. And I think it's naive to think that there is.
Let's stick with the concept of culture, because culture is often driven by high performers. That's who people are looking up to. But these days, so many high performers want more autonomy in their work, right? They want to work from home. They want to have more flexibility. So how can organizations attract and retain high performers given these challenges?
Yeah, it's really hard. I think high performers in anything these days. I mean, Korn Ferry says that between now and 2030, there's going to be 85 million tech jobs that won't get filled. I think that's, they say that even in the context of AI as well. And that's going to cost companies $8.5 trillion. And so the best performers have choice. There's this, the equilibrium between supply and demand has changed. It used to be that demand set the tone and the rules, and these days the supply does. So I think you have to be super flexible as a leader. You've got to be able to create these kind of ecosystems of talent, the ability to have different people in different arrangements. You can't say one size fits all, that everybody has to be in the office 9 to 5 and be in the office and take 2 weeks of vacation, because you'll never find the best talent. And so the idea is really to be able to rethink organization structure in a way that allows for that flexibility. There may be, 2 full-time people that want to come into the office on a regular basis, and maybe 3 full-timers that are digital nomads and want to be somewhere else in the world. And there's a bunch of freelancers that, to get that kind of talent, you're going to have to use freelance platforms like Fiverr to be able to find the talent you need, the very best performing talent.
I want to go deeper on AI as well, because it reminds me of when computers first came out, and I wasn't in the workforce at that time, but I remember learning about Bill Gates and Michael Dell, and the reason why they were so well-versed in computers is because they came out while they were in high school and in college, so they had time to learn about it. They didn't have real jobs. But people in the workforce, they were behind because they're like, hey, I have a job to do. Like, I can't sit around and play with this new technology. And my concern is with AI, if you're not allowed to block off time at your job to think about practical implications of AI, you will fall behind. So how can organizations implement AI to their company in a way that is meaningful but not distracting from the daily tasks of their employees?
I just got back from the conference of the D Cubed, which is an institute at Digital Design and Data Institute at Harvard, and we hosted the first Leading in the Age of AI conference, and it was really mind blowing to me. I think the person that said it best. There were a few things that were really interesting, but I would say that the tech leader, that CTO of JP Morgan, got on stage and talked and said, there's no way that we can outperform the tech companies and build our own large language models. So that's not even a viable idea. But really think about it in the context of when all the cable companies or when the fiber optic came into every town. It was really the difficult part of wasn't building the cable system, it was the last mile to the house. How do we get people using it? What does it mean? All that stuff. And so I think this is a last mile problem, right? And the woman from JP Morgan went so far as to say they have 75,000 data scientists all working on how to implement AI inside JP Morgan. But the number one way she's doing it is she's assigned some data scientists with AI experience to shadow every executive in the company. And that means that there's a person with Jamie Dimon that sits at his desk, listens to every one of his phone calls, is in every meeting, is in every interaction, has purview to his emails, and is building tools with AI to be able to make him more successful. And I think that's the real key, right? It's not companies that are trying to build their own models. I think they're going to fail because those models are proving not as effective as the general models that are being built. But it's really, how do you do the change management? That's really important. And first of all, you've got to embrace it as a leader. You've got to, as Ethan Mollick from Wharton says, you've got to become a power user. And that his thinking on power users is at least 10 hours of usage. Now that might seem like not much, but if you think about how fast it is, you've used it, I've used it. A quick prompt that takes 5 minutes elicits a pretty decent article or whatever you're trying to accomplish. And so it takes a long time to get to the 10 hours. But I think that's the first thing I would think leaders need to do is experience it themselves, use it. The second thing is mandate it. Tell everybody that they need to use it, that they need to be successful at using it. I think that's the big shift. There's a lot of fear, and I think a lot of old systems, always of bureaucracies, fear new technology, whether it's open talent or it's AI. But my sense is you've got to first embrace it yourself as a leader. Second, make sure that everybody uses it. And then third, make sure that you're always thinking about how do you build that into what you're doing. And one great example that I've been using lately that it's just been mind-blowing to me is I've got AI note-taking set up on Zoom calls. And every time I have a call, like literally I finish and there's a pretty decent 95% correct, like good outline of what exactly the notes from the call. And that's been a huge time saver for me. So those kinds of little things, implementing them across an organization creates a lot of momentum for people.
You're bought in on AI. I am as well. But I know some of our viewers right now are thinking, look, same here, but my boss, my manager is not. How can we address that fear, that concern, that hesitancy from upper management to just get over this hump so we can work more efficiently?
I mean, I think the reality is it's going to be a lot like what's happened with open talent, right? What we've seen in open talent, and one of the figures that I really love in our research is that we did a bunch of work early on with freelancer, and what we noticed with freelancers, they had only a couple dozen enterprise relationships with Fortune 500 companies, yet 70% of Fortune 500 companies had an active email on the freelancer system as a customer on a weekly basis. And so, while people wouldn't admit to using freelancers and the companies didn't even know that their workers were using freelancers, people are getting work done by using freelancers. And I think the same thing's happening with AI, and I would encourage people to do that. I would think that the shift in policy, or even if the boss says, don't use it, you'd be a fool not to use it because you're going to get blown out of the water by somebody that is using it. And your proficiency in AI in the next couple of years is going to be critical to getting a raise or a promotion or even a new job.
Yeah, I think that makes sense because you're going to limit your career. If you move on from that company and someone's like, oh, what's your experience with AI? You're like, well, Tim said I couldn't use it.
Right,
exactly.
Exactly.
And so, yeah, I think you're right. Just like ask for forgiveness instead of permission. But
exactly.
Let's go a bit deeper because you mentioned freelancers and I've seen some of your work where you mentioned the term digital migration. And I have a sense of what that means because I live here in New York City. And during the pandemic, a lot of my friends, they left. They moved to smaller towns, including my hometown of Rochester, New York, and left Brooklyn. So can you talk about the concept of digital migration and how that can benefit organizations as well?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. Again, I think it starts with the mindset, stage and level. I've been really surprised by how many, executives want people to return to work. I understand that it's more efficient and you get more collaboration done with everybody sitting in the office, but that's just not the reality these days. And digital technology has allowed us to work from anywhere and do anything, that we can. And so I kind of come to it in a couple of different ways. First of all, there's a digital migration away from the office, right? That's the first thing. And I would attribute that to what I would call value arbitration. And what I mean by that is every company is always looking for ways to create more value and kind of this arbiter between different kinds of things. I can hire a big consulting company like Accenture, or I could hire some freelancers on Fiverr. Like, what's better? Well, there's some risks to the second, but the cost variable is so dramatically different that you might want to try some of these new models. And my sense is that employees have the same rights to have value arbitration. So the scenario that I've heard a lot, I live in a little town in Mexico a lot of the time at Sayulita in Nayarit. And during COVID, I saw a lot of people up here. Like all of a sudden there were, people in their 20s that were, let's say, mid-level marketing people from Brooklyn. And they told me the same story. They said, hey, I lived in Brooklyn. It cost me $90,000 a year. I was making 85 grand working for a shop in New York City. It's a struggle. I always had to borrow some money from my parents. COVID hit. I moved to Mexico, Sayulita. I can live in Sayulita, rent a place, eat 3 meals a day out, and surf twice a day, and it costs me $1,000 a month. So my choice is I can be in New York, going to the office with that stress and losing 5 grand, or being in Mexico doing the exact same amount of work, maybe even more, and putting away $65,000. What's better? And I think that's what's happened, right? People have made those decisions. It could be financial. It could be, technical, could be familial, relationship. It'd be, I want to be near my kids or my parents or whatever those things are, near my family. So that's that's one aspect of digital migration, kind of the moving away from these centers, which I don't think anybody's going to go back. And those companies that mandate people go back, they're just going to lose a lot of employees. So that's the first side. The second side is my sense is with this, the wobbliness in culture today on, my sense across the globe, there's this rise of protectionism. There's a rise of kind of the conservative ethos of like, let's go back to the way we used to be 20 years ago. And with this digital revolution, it's just not going to happen. So, but consequently, one thing that's happened is every country's trying to figure out ways to clamp down on migration, and it's affecting businesses' abilities to do that. So my hunch is that what's going to happen and what's going to accelerate freelancing even more is kind of this digital migration, allowing people to work for you, but not having to actually move them, not have to find the talent to move to a place like Manhattan, to work in an office, to figure out how to do that, but to be able to tap in, whether it's for a day or a week or a year, full-time, part-time, to the best talent in the world to get things done.
Yeah, I think those forward-thinking leaders will succeed, and their companies will do great. And those who don't, things won't work out too well. So we'll see what happens. Agree. But for leaders that are bought in, that want to future-proof their company, what's the signal through the noise? What should they really focus on in the next, let's say, 3 months in order to build business resilience?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's super easy, right? I think that what you have to do is get everybody in the organization to focus on what are the outcomes that need to be created. Like, what are we trying to achieve? And I think in the world of talent, the problem is that we start with jobs and roles, right? Like, let's fill the slots. It's not about the work; it's about the job or the position or the role. And so I think that's the quantum shift that needs to happen. Because if you think not about jobs and roles, you think about outcomes, then all of a sudden everybody's aligned, right? The salespeople, the marketing folks, the HR staff. So what are the outcomes we're trying to achieve? What are the tasks that need to be done to achieve those outcomes? And then what are the skills we need to have people or even AI bots to do those tasks to achieve those outcomes? I think what you'll find is that things go way, way faster. I mean, the scenario I always lay out is think about you're, Terry, just been promoted to be CEO of a Fortune 500 company, and the mandate from the board is that you have to have an AI strategy. Well, the old way to do that is to call your CHRO and say, okay, that's my outcome. I need an AI strategy. I'm going to go to my CHRO and say, go find me a person that can do that. Well, they're going to go through the lens of a full-time employee. They're going to look for an SVP of AI. If you're not a tech company, good luck, right? You're going to be looking for a long time, let's say 6 to 8 months. And then once she's hired, then it's going to take 6 to 8 months to hire her team. Then it's going to take a couple months to do the strategy. So you're looking at 18 months. And by that time, any strategy you're thinking about is going to be gone. Like things are moving so fast. The alternative is to say, you would say, this is my outcome. You meet with your team and say, let's hire the 10 best people off of platforms like Fiverr that could come to Manhattan and sit down with us for a weekend, and let's define the 100 tasks that need to be done for creating an AI strategy. And with that, who's going to do them? What teams do we put together? All those 10 people will be involved, some other folks inside your company, but you can assign those tasks to those folks that you've already working with and the folks you brought in. And literally in a month, you can have a pretty darn good strategy ready to rock and roll. And so that's the cost benefit, right? It might not be as good as the one that's taken 18 months to create, but let's not let great be the enemy of good here. We've got to make sure that, things are good and you experiment and you can blow it up and do it the next time.
Yeah, I like that. And in this case, in 18 months, things are going to change so much anyways, like whatever plan you had, it's still out the window.
Doesn't work, exactly.
But yeah, John, on mine, that's all the questions I had. But I want to leave it open to you if there's anything else that you'd like to share before we hop off here.
No, I think we're in this really interesting place, right? That the world's moving so fast and there's so much generational differences. I think that those of us that have been around for a while and are in control of their companies or their assets, we have to get participation for lots of younger folks that have very different mindset about what work is, what the future of work is. Obviously for younger folks, the idea of a portfolio job is really interesting, right? Like lots of jobs. I'm doing some, creator stuff on TikTok or Instagram, and I've got my job that I do full time, and I've got projects I'm working on with my friends and all those things. That kind of portfolio existence is the future. And I think we just have to accept that and really lean into that.
Awesome. Well, like I was saying, that's what I'm going to prepare my kids for, because they're all young, they're all like under 10 years old. But for me, it's interesting. When I was growing up, my family was like, oh, just go to college, get a job. Like that was it. That was the path. And that's what I did. And even though my dad worked at a tech company for 40 years, he worked at Xerox, like that was just still his zone. It's like, whatever, like go get a job. And now with my kids, I'm like, I don't know, like let's see what happens. There's so many things. Like I think they're going to have their own businesses while they're in high school, like leveraging AI to sell one thing or another. It could be online courses or whatever. And then they'll decide, you know what? Why would I go to college? I already have a business.
I know, exactly, right? And that's what we're trying to prepare people for, right? Is like, how do they add something to the collective value of things, and how do they, grow up to be good citizens? And college is part of it, but maybe it's not.
And before I let you go, I think I told you this before, maybe I shared it, but my thought is with my kids, maybe because I want them to have the college experience. Yeah. So what I might have them do is like live in a college town, even live with college students, but while their friends are at school, they're like watching YouTube videos, watching online courses, and actually running a business. So they're still hanging out, like go party, get it out your system, but they're not wasting X $1,000s a year on college when you can just YouTube so many things.
I know, it's crazy, right? It's crazy.
Thank you. This has been amazing, and I'm glad we got a chance to chat, and thank you for your time. Thank you.